So let's talk about the order of operations. By now, we've been doing the regular operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. But what we're going to do now is start to combine all of these operations. We've even done some work with exponents previously. So we want to learn, what do you do when you have a long string of operations that need to be completed? If you gave this to multiple people without the order of operations, you would get multiple different answers. So what happens in the math community is there's something called the order of operations that ensures that everyone gets the same answer when they do the different problems that are presented. So here's the order of operations. It's basically just a set of rules. The first thing that you do is you're going to evaluate expressions inside parentheses or grouping symbols. So if I look at all these problems, I see that these are 25 divided by 5 is inside parentheses, 12 to the second minus 48 is in parentheses, 5 minus 3 is in parentheses. So that's the first thing we would do to solve any of these problems. Grouping symbols basically means the same thing. Parentheses, grouping symbols, brackets, they're all the same. The second thing that we're supposed to do is evaluate exponents. Well, exponents, or we would call them powers. So if we're evaluating the exponents, the second thing would be these. We would take care of all of the exponents or the powers. The third thing is to multiply and divide from left to right, which that's self-explanatory. And then the last thing is to add and subtract from left to right. So we're going to do the first two problems following the order of operations, and then you'll have an opportunity to do the last three. So if we had 28 divided by 2 to the second power minus 36 divided by 3 to the second power, I have to go back and check my order of operations every time. Evaluate expressions inside parentheses or grouping symbols. So the first thing is the parentheses. So I'm going to look and I'm going to see in question number 1, are there any parentheses? No, there is not. So I now move on to step 2. Step 2 is to evaluate exponents. I have exponents 2 squared and 3 squared. So I'm going to evaluate those, which we know 2 squared is 2 times 2, which is 4. So under 2 squared, I'm going to write the number 4. Under 3 squared, which is 3 times 3, is 9. So under 3 squared, I'm going to write 9. It's very important that we work down. Now that I've done step 2, I didn't need step 1. Now that I've done step 2, everything else I bring down. So I did 28, I bring that down. I bring down my division symbol, I bring down my minus 36, and I bring down my my divided by 3. Minus 36 and divided, my division symbol, I'm sorry. So I'm going to leave the 9 here. So I did my exponents. 2 squared becomes 4, 3 squared becomes 9. I'm done evaluating the exponents. Step 3 is to multiply and divide from left to right. So I go back. I'm looking for multiplication. There is no multiplication. I'm looking for division. I'm going to do the multiplication and division from left to right. So 28 divided by 4 is going to give me 7. And I drew the little arrow to show that I'm combining 28 and 4. And I'm also going to do 36 divided by 9 because I could do all of my multiplication and division from left to right. So 36 divided by 9 gives me 4. I'm going to bring down my minus sign. And so now 7 minus 4 is, so I've done my multiplication and division. There's nothing left. My last step is to add and subtract from left to right. Well, 7 minus 4 is the only thing left, and 7 minus 4 gives me 3. So the final answer to this expression is just 3. Let's look at number 2. 12 plus 25 divided by 5, all to the second power. So again, regardless of what I would like to do first, I have to go back to my order of operations. The first step, evaluate expressions inside parentheses or grouping symbols. So, do I have parentheses in this problem? Yes, I do. Inside the parentheses, I have the expression 25 divided by 5. So if I do have parentheses, I go and do the work in the parentheses first, also following the order of operations. So 25 divided by 5 is the only operation in parentheses. So 25 divided by 5 becomes 5. Since there's now nothing left inside the parentheses, I don't need the parentheses anymore. And so I'm going to just attach my 2, the exponent 2, back to the 5. I'm going to bring everything else down. So the 12 and the plus sign comes down. I'm done with step 1. Step 2 is to evaluate the exponents. So where are my exponents? I have an exponent right here. So 5 to the second power, which just means 5 times 5, which just means 25. So underneath 5 to the second power, I'm going to write the number 25. And everything else that I don't use comes down. So the 12 comes down and the plus sign comes down. I evaluated the exponents. Step 3 is to multiply and divide from left to right. When I look at this problem, there is no multiplication or division left. So that's already taken care of. I don't need that. Step 4 is to add and subtract from left to right. So I have 12 plus 25. And so the only thing left is 12 plus 25, which is 37. So why don't you give number 3 a try? Again, remember, the first step is to evaluate the expressions inside the parentheses. And so we're looking for parentheses first, and then we're going to look for exponents, and then we're going to multiply and divide from left to right, and then we're going to add and subtract from left to right. Some of you may have learned in elementary school that this would be P, E, M, D, A, S, which some people call that PEMDAS, P-E-M-D-A-S, and some people use a memory device which says, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So whichever one you prefer, it is important that you memorize this order. So again, parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division from left to right. And I even like to draw the arrow to ensure that I know what goes from left to right. And addition and subtraction from left to right. So go ahead and give number 3 a try following these steps. It has to go in order. And if you go inside parentheses, remember you have to start over with the order of operations again. So hopefully you were able to first recognize that the first thing is parentheses or grouping symbols. So I do have parentheses, so I have to start inside here. Inside the parentheses, I have an exponent or a power and subtraction. So I'm supposed to do, inside the parentheses, I come across exponents first. So I'm supposed to take 12 to the second power, which is just 12 times 12, which is 144. I need to bring everything else down before I do anything else. So then I look, and the only thing left inside this parentheses is subtraction. So I'm going to do that next. 144 minus 48. And that's 96. So 96, and again, if you have to do scratch work on the side, that's not a big deal. And so so the 96 is now the only thing left in parentheses, so I don't need the parentheses anymore, and I bring everything else down. Every time you have to bring everything else down. So now I have 96 times 2, and 96 times 2 is 180 plus 12, so that should be 192. So my final answer would be 192. Let's go ahead and try question number 4. In question number 4, we saw that the first thing that we do is, since there are no parentheses, I look for exponents or powers. So 2 to the third and 3 to the third. So I can do both of those. 2 to the third becomes 2 times 2 times 2, which is just 8. 3 to the third is 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. And then everything else comes down. So 168 comes down, my division symbol comes down, my plus sign comes down, and my minus 20 comes down. The next operation that I have, I'm now at a point of, I've done my exponents. Now I'm looking for multiplication and division. I do have division right here. So I'm going to do 168 divided by 8, because there is no other multiplication or division. 168 divided by 8 should be 21. And I bring everything else down again. 21 plus 27, bring down the minus 20. And now finally, I get to addition and subtraction from left to right. So I'm going to go from left to right. I can't just pick them in any order I want. I must do from left to right. So I'm going to do 21 plus 27 first, because that's what comes first from left to right. And 21 plus 27 is 48. And then I'm going to bring down everything else. 48 minus 20. And so finally, 48 minus 20 is the last thing, which is just going to be 28. So my final answer is 28. Go ahead and try number 5 now. So for number 5, again, I have parentheses. So I do that first. Inside the parentheses is subtraction, so 5 minus 3 becomes 2. Since there's nothing else in the parentheses, I don't need it anymore. I'm just going to bring everything else down. 10 divided by 2 plus 2 to the third. Now that I'm done with the parentheses, I go back to my list, and the next thing that I do are the exponents. And I want to clarify that the reason I didn't do exponents first was because I had to do everything in the parentheses first. So now that I'm done with the parentheses, now I go back to my list, and the first thing there is exponents. So 2 to the third is just 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. So I'm going to bring an 8 under the 2 to the third, and I always line everything up so that I know vertically what everything came from. I know 2 to the third is 8, and I bring everything else down. 10 divided by 2 plus 8. I go back to my list. The next thing is multiplication and division. I only have division. I don't have multiplication. So I'm going to do 10 divided by 2. I'm going to put a 5 underneath 10 divided by 2 and bring everything else down. So 5 plus 8. And then finally, I do addition and subtraction. So 5 plus 8 is 13. So that's my final answer. So as you can see, if you follow the same steps every time, you will consistently get the right answer. So we just have to memorize the rule. Again, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. The one thing that we have to make sure we get is when you have to do multiplication and division, you have to do those together from left to right, or in order from left to right. And the same thing for addition and subtraction. You have to do them in order from left to right. Even if subtraction came first, I'd have to do the subtraction first from left to right. If I see division first, I do division first from left to right.